What's going on, guys? You're listening to Luke Squared Starting Lineup.
So in today's episode, we break down the OFSAA Hockey Finals. We talk about how shootouts fit in modern sport.
Canada's first professional soccer league.
March Madness breakdown, predictions, and preview.
Welcome to episode 3, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Honestly, we thought YouTube was going to cancel us at this point.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a wild ride so far.
We thank you for tuning in, though. Honestly, I'm Lucas Slosser-mclean.
I'm Luke Zettel.
Welcome back. We've got a couple topics tonight, starting off with kind of a local sports topic.
Yeah, let's dive right into it. We've got our alma mater, the SHHS, Sacred Heart High School Walkerton Crusaders. The boys hockey team wins OFSAA a phenomenal season. They went 32-0.
Undefeated.
They didn't lose a single game.
Yeah.
And they went to the OFSAA AA Championships in Kincardine, Ontario, and took care of business.
Absolutely. I mean, you know what? A big kudos obviously has to go out to the coaches. Obviously, Mr. Hambrook and Mr. Orr, Mike and Christian have done an incredible job with this squad. Obviously, last year as well, they thought that, you know what, it was a potential OFSAA year as well. But, you know what, there was some controversy there with the BAA situation. Ended up in a fight and whatnot. But they were there this year and they got the job done. A couple overtime games as well. But you know what? We're really proud of them. We wanted to give them a big shout out because it's been a long time coming, and it's been the first provincial championship for Sacred Heart in a couple years for sure.
Yeah, it was really nice to see. I know back in 2013, the boys came really close. They lost to the same team that they lost the CWASA finals to, the Central Western Ontario finals. They ended up silver medal at CWASA and silver medal at OFSAA that year. And it's nice to see them take care of business. They win the BAA championship, the Central Western Ontario championship, and the provincial championship. And on the final day, they fought through some adversity. They ended up winning their semifinal in overtime.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's talk about how they won their final.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously, it was a hell of a game. Iona Catholic was the runner-up there in that division, who actually went ahead in the game. It was later tied up by Kyle Durr, and then, you know what, the go-ahead goal by Carter Bulow. With 3 minutes left, Iona tied it up, and it was ended up settling in a shootout after 10 minutes of overtime to no avail, which kind of brings us onto a topic of, personally, Luke, what do you think about, you know what, shootouts in championship games?
This is a big question, and a lot of it sort of deals with the circumstance of the game and how that's being played. But personally, if I were to sum it up, my opinion, I don't like shootouts when it comes to big moments. Especially in team sport, it takes away from the team.
Sure.
It makes it an individual effort. And,
I get that.
And as a result, it's not always a true depiction of the winning team, and it breaks it down to the team who has the better clutch performers individually.
Sure, no, I agree with that. I remember 2016 MLS Cup Finals, Toronto FC against Seattle Sounders. The first time Toronto FC has ever been in the MLS Cup Finals. Dominating all game. Incredible performance by Stefan Fry, the Seattle Sounders goalkeeper, former TFC goalkeeper. And they ended up going to a shootout. TFC, after dominating for, 120 minutes, ended up losing that. There's something to be said for championship games should not be settled by shootouts. I completely agree with you. I think I've got no problem with, a championship game being, a regular season game being ended in a shootout. Sometimes you see those baseball MLB games, right, and they go to the 18th inning, and you know what, it's crazy to watch, but you know what, sometimes I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with them, cutting to the chase. I think that, coaches have the time to prepare for special teams, prepare for shootouts in a way that they can kind of equalize the fact that it could go that way. But I think when it comes to a championship game, there's no room for that in professional sport.
No, and when you come down to the best of the best, you're awarding the championship to the best team.
Yeah.
And I think that sums it up in itself right there. And I don't think that there's a place in a championship situation for an individual effort to decide the outcome. But let's look a little bit into the reasons that we have shootouts in a championship game, in particular why we see it in high school sports. So if we look at an OFSAA sport, we look at high school soccer. There's actually regulations that limit the amount of playing time that a team can play in a day. So that's why we see if a high school team is playing one game in a day, or potentially if it's only one game in a day, we'll see the normal 90-minute game with your 30-minute of extra time period followed by a shootout. If that team could if we're in a tournament situation and that team could potentially be playing 2 games in a day, they lower that to 80 minutes of regular time, 20 minutes of extra time, and then a shootout. Mm-hmm. And then 3 games in a day, it's down to 60 minutes regular time.
Yeah, so forth, yep.
And so there's a mandate put in place by OFSAA to ensure that there's player safety and that we're not exhausting our players to the point of them not being able to even run up and down the pitch. But in terms of hockey, I was actually in contact with our old gym teacher and volleyball coach, Mr. Mark Dunn, today, and he said as far as he knows, there's no regulation put in place for that reason in terms of ensuring players aren't playing too long. So we talking about
cost then? Are we talking about...
So what Mark told me is that a lot of it has to do with cost and the time associated with renting a facility. Yeah. When we're dealing with a hockey championship, you're taking that ice time, and it's my understanding that at 5 p.m. there was a local league hockey team that had a practice in the arena that the OFSAA championship was being played, and they wanted to make sure that they weren't cutting into that time because obviously that means more money for high school sports.
Yeah.
And so there's this limit placed to ensure that the game time itself doesn't go over anything expected, because we could be talking if we're breaking down to quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals, that could be an extra 1, 2, 3 hours of playing time.
Sure.
So what do you think about that?
I think it makes sense. I think I'm not surprised considering where it all ends up being with, what college sports and high school sports. The governing organization always finds a way to kind of put the benefit of the actual sport and the players aside and kind of put the organization first. And as tough as it is to see, it's just like any sort of organized sports scandal, which we have all the time in today's era, right? Obviously, you're there for a couple more hours, but when it comes down to it, you need to let just the better team be shown. It's putting limitations on the game. It's letting, obviously if you can't win in regulation, there's something to be said like, okay, well, if you can't win in regulation, this is the consequence, for instance. But you know what? I think it all depends because there's plenty of overtimes to be played. And you know what? Shootout's just such an individual game, and it's such a team game the entire season. So to see the highest federation of sport in the province for high school have the championship game end by a shootout is tough to watch. I was definitely nervous watching Sacred Heart High School go through.
Yeah, and we were watching the game, and what was going through my mind, I was watching the live stream, and I was thinking, this team is 31-0, and for them to potentially have their only loss and the biggest loss of the season come as a result of an individual effort and taking away from that team play that drove them to that perfect record, it would be heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And the work that Coach Mike Orr and Coach Christian Hambrock put into the team, I couldn't imagine how they would be feeling if that was a result. So needless to say, we're super happy for our team and for our school. And it's sad to see that this was the result, especially for Iona. I feel for them.
It's tough.
Because, they were in overtime and they stuck with Sacred Heart. And that wasn't a fluke. They were a very, very good team. But it's not only in high school sports that we see this. Let's talk about the Olympics and World Juniors.
Yeah, honestly, obviously in the World Juniors, they do stick to the shootout, and we've seen Canada obviously lose important games in the shootouts. And you know what? As well, the MLS, Major League Soccer, they also, as I touched on at the beginning of the episode, deal with shootouts, and the Olympics as well. So you know what? The NHL, when they do get to the playoffs, the Stanley Cup playoffs, they kind of get rid of the shootout, which is you know what, a great idea. They just do continuous overtime. So where do you think the direction should be pointed for professional sports organizations as we're moving forward into the future?
I like what the NHL does, and there's some controversy and some debate over. Take for example, you have two teams playing in a Game 7 of a series in the playoffs, and say they go to triple or quadruple overtime, and this game dictates the end of the first round. The team who ends up winning in triple or quadruple overtime could potentially have to play in 2 or 3 days. And a lot of people say that this isn't fair for this team. You know, they come off a big win and they don't have as much rest time. But I think that that's a testament to the team that wasn't successful. Yep. And say that rightfully so, this team should be at a bit of a disadvantage because of the fight of the unsuccessful team.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a part of the game, and that's a part of a burden that you have to overcome.
Yeah.
By having a team that you weren't as easy to walk all over, per se. And I like this because typically in the NHL, yes, there aren't as many fun upsets as you might see in single game formats, so the World Cup, March Madness. But I like it how typically a team deserving of winning the Stanley Cup wins the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
Because it's such a long process and it's such a team process.
And there's such a praise on the Stanley Cup over the President's Trophy,
exactly.
Which I never understood personally. Obviously, yeah, you need to be able to get hot when you get hot. It kind of shows, you know what, who's clutch when they need to be. But you know what, the President's Trophy is such a measure of consistency. Yeah. Who's the best over 82 games? Is that not more impressive than, you know what, who's better over 16 to 24, you know what, that region of games. And yeah, it kind of shows, you know, who's the best team, who's able to stick it out, grind it out, play when they're still tired. That's the true, you know what, test to an athlete. So, I mean, I think you said it all, Luke, in terms of where they should be going. I think shootout, and I think it's a pretty popular opinion as well, especially on the professional stage. So. And
it's interesting, too, because this is pretty specific towards certain team sports. You look at a team sport like baseball, like Lucas mentioned, there's no way to have sort of a shootout, or even basketball, there's no way to have a shootout in basketball. Mind you, there is a lot more scoring in basketball, of course. But this is sort of really only directed towards sports that have a goalie.
Sure.
Right? And it ends up being an offensive player against a goalie, so it's a
one-on-one situation.
It's very specific for sure. But in my opinion, if I had it my way, whenever you get into a playoff situation or a championship situation, any type of one-on-one play or shootout would be eliminated, and that way that it makes it so that the championship is won or lost as a unit.
Sure. I agree with you. That's kind of the epitome of team sports, so why not have the deciding factor be like that? Also, we just want to say congratulations as well to Neil McNeil High School for winning AAA OFSAA, as Sacred Heart had won the AAA OFSAA. Neil McNeil finished off the OFSAA championship by beating the local Elmira District Secondary School Lancers in the finals. Great game there, great organizational, and a great tournament to watch for both of those divisions. Lots of exciting hockey, and so congratulations to both those champions. Luke, I think we're going to move on to a pretty new topic here. We're seeing the Canadian Premier League kicking off on April 27th, 2019. The first time we've seen professional soccer at this stand. Obviously, our own domestic league. We've had professional teams in Canada for a while now. What do you think?
You know, this is not going to be a quick process, and sort of implementing and establishing ourselves as a key part of international soccer.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen overnight. And I really like what Soccer Canada is doing here.
Yeah.
And we're bringing in, yes, we might not be including the big Canadian teams such as Toronto FC, Vancouver Whitecaps. We've got Montreal Impact.
Yeah.
They won't be participating in the Canadian Premier League. However, this is it's a stepping stone, and you've got to take baby steps in order to reach something great.
Yep.
And I like what Soccer Canada is doing here because it's frustrating as someone who loves sports and who loves following, for example, the World Cup of Soccer.
Yep.
When's the last time that we've been able to cheer on Team Canada men's soccer?
Oh, man.
In the World Cup.
30 years now.
We weren't even alive.
Yeah.
And it's fun to pick a country to cheer for in the World Cup, but there's something to be said for domestic pride. And this is a stepping stone to establishing Canada on the international stage.
Yeah.
And it's not going to happen quickly, but I like what we're doing. What do you think about this?
Well, you know what? This is something that I think personally I've been waiting for a long time, despite, you know what, me moving away from like a career in soccer. You know what, having the chance to play last year in the States, noticing that the United States has the, you know what, USSDA, which is the Development Academy League down south, which is essentially a full-time program committed to player development. And this includes a lot of pro team academies. So, you know what, they kind of have their head on straight in terms of how they're going to develop their players and transition them into, you know what, whether that's NCAA or semi-pro, you know what, or whether that's professional at the lower league of the USL or the MLS, or even going across seas. But I think that this is an incredible format they have down there. They've got all sorts of teams across from border to border, north to south, east to west, and I think it's something that we need to get going in our country domestically. You know what? We currently do have the CAF, obviously, which is an academy league across the nation, which is trying to grow their players, but hasn't been. It's getting more popular, as you know what, the years pass. But when I played, for sure, it was still Ontario Soccer that was governing us. So the top league was the OFSAA, the Ontario Youth Soccer League. We're starting to kind of drift over to the academy league as well. And Ontario also has League One, which is kind of a semi-professional league. Once you get to a certain age, which is a decent start, but the CPL is bringing in a whole new perspective on this idea. It gives you a format, it gives you a structure, it gives, you know, it installs pride into Canadian young kids, boys and girls all over. Obviously, there's just a men's league right now, but you know what, it'd be great to see the women's league get in there as well. The Canadian women are 5th in the world right now.
And that's something that's overshadowed. Nobody respects and appreciates enough how good our women's national team is. We're always a contender at the Olympics for a medal.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's unheard of to see us in the hunt for the World Cup come Women's World Cup.
No, and that's this summer actually as well. So lots of things to look forward to. Canadian soccer, lots of things to look forward to. Obviously, the 2026 World Cup, the Tri-City or the Tri-Country host, and Alphonso Davies, obviously an up-and-coming Canadian prospect, moving off to Bayern Munich.
Yeah, it's really good to see young Canadian talent playing in European league and playing for one of the most prominent teams in European soccer, being Bayern Munich.
No, absolutely, and obviously going back to the CPL, John Herdman, the Canada men's soccer coach and former women's soccer coach, said he's going to be definitely watching the CPL closely this summer and thinks that it's a very positive change. He's excited for the CPL to help produce Canada's Olympic and youth soccer teams. And you know what? Ultimately, as I said before, this just provides framework. It kind of gets people excited at a youth level. Soccer in Canada is the number one sport for youth registration. You know what? Obviously, hockey is super important, being the winter national sport, and lacrosse being the summer national sport. But it's kind of time to start taking this sport a little bit more seriously. You know what? We have the bodies. We just need to start getting the proper framework for people that, you know what, do have this dream to get to the next level, the proper foundation to get there.
And what frustrates me most is when people use the argument of, well, soccer isn't our sport.
Yeah.
Well, why wouldn't we want to make our country more well-rounded and establish ourselves on a national and international stage for being known for something like this? And obviously, being athletes and being sports fanatics, we want to see our country thrive as much as possible in every single aspect.
Look at the U.S. as well, right? Obviously, Canada's, hockey's Canada's game, and that's fair. But the U.S. are right there every time. They've got, obviously they have the NHL, which is kind of their own domestic league, which is why it's really important for Canada to get its own domestic league. You kind of provide, a reason for Canadian kids to get to the next level. It attracts players from other countries, and which become coaches, which become mentors, and it just kind of pushes it up the system. But you know what? Look at the U.S. down south, right? Nobody would consider soccer the U.S.'s game, but they are still among the top 25, top 30, and have been for quite a long time in world soccer. So it doesn't have to be your game, but you know what? On the international level, it doesn't hurt to, see your country up there.
And it's no surprise to see USA in the World Cup fleet. However, if we were to see Team Canada in the next World Cup of soccer, it'd be astounding. We wouldn't know what to do with ourselves.
No, it's been a long time coming. I know there's lots of fans around the country and fanatics like myself, and honestly like you as well, Luke, that are looking to see the country get back to that level.
Exactly. So, moving on, this is the big buzz in sport right now. Obviously, this is March. This is March Madness. And we've got the NCAA College Basketball Championship Finals happening right now.
Yep. And you know what? It was a crazy first weekend, round of 64, round of 32 done. Some upsets, and you know what? We called some of the upsets. So I'm not going to say that you should listen to us, but when it comes to this time of the year, we definitely have some good suggestions. Obviously, we want to talk about UC Irvine over Kansas State. We talked about it. You know what? Such a good interior defending squad. UC Irvine and Kansas State couldn't do much about it. And then obviously the Oregon-Wisconsin, one of the hottest teams in the country, Oregon Ducks, over the number 5 seed Wisconsin. You know what? You love to see that as well. So, you know what? A fair amount of upsets. But then when it comes down to the Sweet 16, Luke, we're not seeing a lot of parity in terms of the seeding, are we?
It's kind of a chalkboard Sweet 16 right now. We've got all 1 through 4 seeds, with the exception of Auburn being a 5 seed, and as we mentioned, Oregon being the 12 seed. And they are definitely the outlier in the Sweet 16, but I would be a little bit uneasy if I were Virginia. Let's talk about that.
Are you counting Oregon out of that game, or do you still have, you still have feelings about them?
It'll be interesting. Virginia, arguably the best defense in the country. However, if you take a look at Oregon's win against UC Irvine, that was a close game, and it was within reach for UC Irvine until about 10 minutes left in the second half, and Oregon just started pouring it in.
Yeah. They did, and you know what? I'm worried about this Oregon team as well because that was a huge win. Obviously, 73-54, and they had just come off a win, 72-54 against Wisconsin. So, if I'm Virginia, knowing how last tournament went, obviously they made it by the first 2 rounds, which they couldn't say last year after UMBC. It's not a traditional 12 seed. It's a team that's hitting fire at the right time. They're definitely playing like a 4 or 5 seed, and if you're UVA, you're definitely not sleeping easily going into this game for sure.
Yeah, I think it's not fluke that Oregon is in the Sweet 16. So it'll be interesting to see how that game plays out. Let's move down to the other game in the South. In the Sweet 16, we have Tennessee and Purdue. What are your thoughts on that, Lucas?
Well, Purdue absolutely steamrolled Villanova as the 3 seed over the 6 seed. I'm not surprised about that. Honestly, I was a little bit surprised to see Villanova get over St. Mary's College from California, but that was only a 4-point win as well. Villanova struggled with consistency all season long. So, you know what? When the Purdue Boilermakers get hot, they get hot. And they were 61-48 over Old Dominion as well. So that's a team that's hot. They are scoring the ball very well, especially from the 3-point line. And Tennessee, obviously, coming over an overtime win over Iowa.
And
what do you think?
That was a bit of a shaky game for Tennessee. They had a 25-point lead in the second half, and they blew it.
Yeah.
They ended up tied at the end of regulation, and they gapped out well in overtime. But that's a game that they shouldn't have even been close with the 10-seed Iowa. Iowa, I was a little bit surprised based on how they'd been playing going into the tournament that they even made it past the first round.
A flashy team, to say the least.
And so Tennessee, I expected more out of them, especially beating Kentucky in the SEC tournament.
Yeah.
I thought they would have done a little bit better, so that'll be an interesting game. So who do we have coming out of the South? What are your predictions for that?
Well, you know what, Luke? I've got the Boilermakers in the Elite Eight against the Virginia Cavaliers. You know what? Oregon obviously had a great run, but I think Virginia's a little bit too strong. I like the Boilermakers. I think they've cruised through the first 2 games. Tennessee, obviously, a 7-point win in their first game and a 6-point win in their second game after going to overtime. And I think they're just a little bit too shaky. They're definitely a good team, definitely good from 3. But I really like Purdue. I think they've had a great season. I've got Purdue and Virginia.
Right on. And who's going to win that matchup?
I've got Purdue. I don't think Virginia's a tournament team. I think Tony Bennett is a great coach, but not the ACC Coach of the Year. Obviously, that's a little bit biased, but I just don't see. I think it's a little bit even too predictable that UVA could get all the way to the Final Four.
Interesting. I have the same result from the Sweet 16, but I like Virginia going through. You know, they're an experienced team. Yes, there is some controversy over who should have been the ACC Coach of the Year, but Tony Bennett, he's a good coach. And Virginia had a bit of a scare at halftime against Gardner-Webb, but they came out and then they ended up winning the game by 15 points. So I have Virginia moving on to the Elite Eight and beating Purdue in the Elite Eight because of their senior presence. They've got some very good weapons. They've got Ty Jerome, Kyle Guy, Diakite.
Okay, but let's talk about Carson Edwards. He dropped 42 points. Even Matt Harms dropped 18. Ryan Klein, 12 points. I'll give you it that UVA, if Carson Edwards doesn't come out and put on a show, they could be in a little trouble because Virginia forces you to play your very best team basketball. So I get that. But I think, you know what, this is a tournament-built team. I think the Boilermakers are ready for a run. And also, I just would love to see it.
I'd love to see it too. So you're going with Purdue, but I'm sticking with Virginia.
I got Purdue, for sure.
Okay, moving over to the East. The matchups that we have in the Sweet 16 out of this region, we have Duke and Virginia Tech, an ACC matchup, and then we have LSU and Michigan State. What are your thoughts on these games? Let's start with Duke and Virginia.
Okay, well, Duke narrowly escaped UCF. A little bit ridiculous, a couple offensive boards, a potential charge, not saying it is, but and then, you know what, a clutch basket by RJ Barrett, as well as Zion Williamson down the stretch. You know what? They look like they're a team meant for the clutch. Most teams would have folded at that point, so kudos to them for finishing off. But they also, you know what, it could be a hint of luck as well. UCF looked like they had it with about 2 minutes to go, and then, you know what, the layup on the buzzer and then the putback on the buzzer, neither of those would drop either. It looked like they were a gust of wind away from dropping. So, you know what, you hate to see that. But Duke, I think, is just too strong for Virginia Tech. Obviously, Luke, I know that Zion was gone the last time they played Virginia Tech. I'm not sure if you want to go in a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Duke traveled to Virginia and played against Virginia Tech in the ACC regular season. Zion Williamson was hurt at the time, as was Robinson, Virginia Tech's all-star from Canada. And it was a battle, and Virginia Tech came out on top. But I think that Duke has a bit of an edge. They're coming off a close upset. They just about got upset by the 9 seed out of the East. And when you have a team that centers themselves around a 7'6" big man in UCF, that's being Taco Fall. Yeah. They ended up playing very well from the perimeter, seeing as that's traditionally not their game. And Duke was able to adjust to that. So I think coming out of that game and ending up getting the win, that will light a fire underneath Duke, and they won't be taking anything for granted against a team that they know because they see them year after year, and they're familiar with Buzz Williams and his coaching style for Virginia Tech. So I think that Duke will move on to the Elite Eight. Now let's move down to LSU and Michigan State. What are your thoughts on this game, Lucas?
Well, you know what? LSU, their last performance against Maryland, the Terrapins, a 2-point win with 1.6 seconds left, hit the high off the glass with the layup. 4 players there hitting over double-digit points. Lots of shared basketball there. We also have to talk about how Coach Wade is not even present in the tournament. We've got an interim head coach for the Tigers as well, and they've responded incredibly. They're not an underdog, but it's almost like a Cinderella story for a higher seed. The 3 seed from Louisiana State University coming out of nowhere, essentially, after having an interim head coach. And you know what? Dealing with a lot of nicks and knocks in the later part of the season. And you know what? Coming up top on a decent up-and-coming Maryland Terrapins team. They're going up against Michigan State. And I love Michigan State. I think, you know what, they did sweep the Michigan Wolverines, who's a great team. I've got Michigan State. I think they've got too much firepower. And I think that even though this LSU team has done well and, you know what, lost one of their players in the fall as well and has gone through a lot of adversity, that was great to get them to the Sweet 16. But to get them farther and farther and, you know what, into the Elite Eight, Final Four, etc., I think that, you know what, you just need a better basketball team, which the Spartans have.
And I think it's going to be tough for LSU without their coach going up against one of the best coaches in college basketball in Tom Izzo with Michigan State. And the talent that Tom Izzo has, it won't be beat, I don't think. So I'm with you, Lucas. I think I have Michigan State moving on to the Elite Eight. Who do you think comes out of the East region, Duke or Michigan State?
I've got Michigan State, Luke, and it's not because I'm not a big fan of Duke. I think it's just because Michigan State's gone through, you know what, number 15 Bradley by 11 points, and then a number 10 Minnesota by 20. I think they're not going to struggle with LSU at all. I think they're going to be pretty well rested and ready to go. Duke obviously overcame that close game to UCF, and I think it's going to light a fire under their butts a little bit. They're gonna have a good game against Virginia Tech, but I think they just don't have enough experienced players on their team to get to the later stages of the tournament. And even though it is the most star-studded lineup and one of the best recruiting classes of all time, I think those teams traditionally cannot make it to the next round. So, or make it to the final, make it to the thing where, you know what, we are the best basketball team in the country. So I've got MSU. I think they're a great program, and obviously, as you said, Coach Izzo, you know what, he's got a good thing going on over there. So
I'm going to have to disagree with you on this one, Lucas. And yes, I am a Duke fan. However, I think that when Duke matches up with Michigan State, Coach K has experience against Tom Izzo and the Spartans with a young team. You look back at the Champions Classic in fall of 2017, Coach K had 4 starting freshmen, and they ended up beating Michigan State on a big stage by 8 points. And I think that he's going to use that experience and his coaching experience to his advantage. And I think that the mentorship from Coach K is going to outweigh Tom Izzo, and the clutch performance from the Duke youngsters will overcome the adversity from the Spartans. Nothing against the Spartans program. Obviously, they're one of the best programs, arguably, in the country. But I think that Duke will make it on to the Final Four.
Fair enough. Agree to disagree, I suppose. Let's talk about the West, though, Luke. Obviously, the West was looked at as not one of the best regions going into the tournament, but how do they look now?
Well, this is a very textbook Sweet 16 from the West. We have the 1, 2, 3, and 4 seeds still remaining, being Michigan, Texas Tech, Florida State, and Gonzaga. Let's talk about the Michigan and Texas Tech matchup that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got a huge matchup here. Michigan obviously rolling over Montana as everybody thought they would, and then an incredible game against Florida, who had surged past Nevada with a good game. But you know what? This Michigan team looks strong. But honestly, we can't sleep on the Red Raiders either, because they gave Buffalo way too much to handle as well, 78-58 in that game. So this is a great game. This is one of the more exciting games for sure, especially in the West. But both of these games are incredibly exciting. I have Michigan. I think their season overall was better. They played a lot more highly ranked teams as well. And you know what? Their 2 losses to Michigan State Spartans during the season, I think they've learned how to handle a top 10 team, and I think they're going to be ready for the Red Raiders. I've got the Wolverines into the Elite Eight. But the other semifinal, Luke, tell me a little bit about that, because what a matchup.
This is Gonzaga and Florida State. We've got The best team from the West Coast Conference, despite their loss to SMC in the finals, they end up earning the 1 seed, and they're playing Florida State University from the Atlantic Coast Conference. And this is a rematch of last year's Sweet 16, where Florida State prevailed and knocked off the number 1 seed Gonzaga. So this is going to be a matchup and a battle. But let's look at Florida State a little bit. They're 4 seed, but I think that they could even be as high as a 2 seed based on the way that they've been playing. In their last stretch of games, their only 2 losses are to which teams? North Carolina and Duke, both 1 seeds. Big win in the semifinals of the ACC tournament, beating Virginia, who is a 1 seed. Yeah. Other than that, they haven't had any poor losses. They've had a number of quality wins, and they've been playing really, really good basketball. So if I'm Gonzaga, especially after losing to St. Mary's, a team that you should roll over, I think that Florida State has a bit of an edge here, and I'm taking Florida State to make it through to the Elite Eight. And I'm with you on the same page with Michigan. I think that it'll be a Florida State-Michigan matchup in the Elite Eight coming out of the West
I'd
region.
love to agree with you. I love Florida State. Obviously, Kabengele, the Canadian kid on that team, and Terrence Mann, a great, great team. But I think Gonzaga, I'd hate to say this because I'm always a little bit critical about the West Coast Conference. But Gonzaga obviously rolled over number 16 Farley Dickinson, and then pretty much rolled over Baylor as well. Not that those are great teams, but I think that they are just too solid of a team, despite their mediocrely difficult schedule this year. The resume is not great, but I think that with Rui Hachimura, I think he's going to be able to be too much for Florida State. I think they're too well balanced. I've got Gonzaga going in against Michigan, and then I've got Michigan actually taking Gonzaga from there and going into the Final Four.
Wow. Moving on from that game, I have Florida State and Michigan in that Elite Eight game, and that's going to be a battle. I think I will agree with you. I think Michigan will make it into the Final Four, just based on the fire that's been lit on being swept 2 games in the regular season and losing again to Michigan State in the Big Ten tournament. I like Michigan moving through to the Final Four.
Yeah.
So right now we have Virginia/Purdue making it out of the South region. We have Duke/Michigan State making it out of the East region.
Michigan State.
We are unanimous on Michigan.
I'll agree with you on that.
Making it out of the West region. Let's talk about the Midwest. The teams we have remaining. Number 1 seed North Carolina Tar Heels and Auburn squaring off on Friday night, I believe. Friday night. And we have Kentucky and Houston in the other Sweet 16 matchup out of the Midwest region. Let's talk about Kentucky and Houston.
For sure. I think Houston, a lot of people slept on them early in the tournament, including myself. I didn't think they had an incredible season. Obviously, they were ranked top 10 for the majority of the season. I just didn't see that they had enough quality wins against quality teams, quad 1 teams. But they rolled over Georgia State and then rolled over Ohio State. I am not going to be sleeping on them anymore against this. Kentucky team, they had beaten Wofford, but I watched that game and I don't think they deserved it. I think that McGee, obviously one of the best three-point shooters of all time in the NCAA, had an 0 for 12 game, set actually a record after setting the record for most amount of three-pointers hit, set the record for most amount of attempts without a make. And I think that they easily could have won that game. They were with Kentucky the entire second half, and just missed some key shots down the road. I think Kentucky's a good squad. We're not tested against AC in the first round, but I'd love to see Houston come out of there. I'm not 100% sure how that's going to go. That's a huge toss-up compared to any of the games. I'm going to have to go with Houston in this one.
Once again, I'm going to go against you. I think that Coach Cal and his freshman lineup, a team that has been ranked in the top 25 from the get-go and rightfully earned themselves a 2 seed despite a loss to Tennessee in the SEC tournament, I think that they're going to come through and they'll find themselves in the Elite Eight. What do you think about the other team filling in from the top of the Midwest bracket? We've got your North Carolina Tar Heels and the Auburn Tigers.
Obviously, I'm going to have to take my UNC Heels. I think they're a favorite for the championship. Not even, all biases aside, I think this is a great combination between, the young Kobe White and the strong seniors of, Cameron Johnson, Luke May, and Garrison Brooks. So I think that this is just a really strong team in general. And you know what? They rolled over Washington, who's not a terrible team at all. They led the Pac-12 regular season and a good defensive squad, but this UNC team is a score early, score often type of team, scoring over 80 points in both their games. And you know what? They had struggled the first half against Iona, but they really settled in. When their 3 points are going up and in, you know what? I'm not sure how many teams in the country can actually beat them. But they're going to get up against a good team, an Auburn team that beat a 4-seed Kansas by 14 after Kansas had just demolished Northeastern. And you know what? Auburn escaped a close game against New Mexico State in the round of 64, but it looks like they've kind of settled into their groove. Lots of good individual performances for Auburn, but I got to go with North Carolina. I think that team's too well balanced and can score too early and too often.
I don't know. I like Auburn a lot. They're coming off an SEC championship, and frankly, they took care of business against Kansas. They were doubled their points at half. They were in command, and that allowed them to take an easy second half against Kansas, a team that was ranked in the top 4 at the start of the season, and they're rolling right now.
Definitely going to be a battle of the three-point shooters. Bryce Brown was going crazy. You know what? Even OKK was going pretty wild. So you know what? There's lots of 3 points coming from all directions from both teams. Going to be high-powered offense, but I've got to take the Heels into the Elite Eight.
I'm liking Auburn. I think if there's a team that can beat North Carolina before the national championship, I think it's Auburn.
Fair enough. And then I've got UNC obviously into the Final Four over Houston or Kentucky. I think both those teams are not deep enough. Obviously, Kentucky's got, Tyler Hero and Keldon Johnson and Coach Cal running a great team there. But I don't even have them getting past Houston just because I think they struggled too much down the stretch. And I've got UNC taking a toll on Houston as well.
So we've got a bit of a mix-up again. I have Kentucky beating Auburn in the Elite Eight game out of the Midwest, setting up a good matchup against Virginia.
Who do you have in the finals? It's getting a little confusing. Who do you have in the finals, and who's your pick?
In the finals, yeah. I still have to go with Duke. Duke will end up beating Michigan in the East-West matchup in the Final Four. And I think that they will end up beating Virginia in the finals. Virginia's defense will propel them past Kentucky in their Final Four matchup. I have Duke and Virginia in the finals.
All right. Well, I've got UNC in the finals against the Michigan State Spartans. I think that team is ready to go. And then I have UNC taking home the national championship. This sounds a little biased, but you know what? If I'm being honest, this is the most confident I've felt about them in a while, even when they had that, national championship team. So this is a great balanced team.
Notice how I didn't pick a national winner. I just picked the final.
You didn't? Oh, you didn't pick a winner?
I don't think so.
I stopped listening to you after you said Duke was going to beat Michigan State. So let's move on.
You're such an emotional picker.
Anyways, you know what? March Madness well underway. We're big fans. Obviously, our bracket tournament's going underway as well.
Who's winning the bracket challenge?
I'm currently winning the bracket challenge.
Shut up. Lucas is not even close.
It doesn't matter. The point is, you know what? Lots of sports going on there. We're looking forward to, breaking down this next round. Thursday, Friday, we get back at it, I believe. And should be a crazy round of 16, Elite 8, Final 4, and Final.
I cannot wait for UNC to get knocked out by the Auburn Tigers.
All right, well, that's all the time. That's all the time we have today, guys. Thank you again for tuning in. I'm Lucas slosser-mclean.
I'm Luke Zettel.
And we'll see you next time for sure.
Take care, guys.